just feel like I need to catch my breath after that song. Probably something to do with the belting at the top of my lungs thing. They told me a couple of years ago that they do have audio of my mic even when I'm not up here. It's like, well, that sounds really good, like good blackmail, guys. So, hope you don't ever need it. That song is called Revelation Song. And I think that its words ring true as a revelation. Jesus, your name is power, breath, and living water. Such a marvelous mystery. Sometimes we call mysteries something of suspense, something of a thrill, something maybe that is feared or causes anxiety. And in our communion liturgy, what we say is the great mystery of our faith, that Christ has died, Christ is risen, and Christ will come again. As we proclaim the great mystery of our faith, the marvelous mystery, it makes me think differently about mystery. It makes me think differently about my story and the mystery of God, the great mystery, the marvelous mystery of a God that is with us, even when we don't feel it, even when we don't see it or hear it or know it. What a marvelous mystery that we worship a God that is with us. Well, good morning. My name is Julie, and I am the pastor to this wonderful Access community. And I had a revelation this week. Speaking of revelation, I came into work one day this week, and I parked next to Eric, our worship leader, our worship director. And Eric had a piece of paper like stuck in the hood of his car. And I kind of was like, what was that? I wonder if it's something that he needs. You know, he's a new dad. Like, I don't know, it might have been something important. And so I took it off and brought it inside to him. Not, of course, without reading it first. I mean, because you would do the same thing. Anyway, and it turns out that it was a devotional. And so I give it to Eric. I'm like, hey, this was on your car. And he takes it and he was like, maybe God is speaking to me. And I said, no, God is speaking to me. And I said, no. And he said, well, it was on my car. I said, but yeah, I found it. So after we argued for a little while back and forth about who God was speaking to, we paused upon this verse that is at the very top of this. The devotional says at the top, speak up, speak out. And the scripture that it draws from is from Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9. And it says, speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of all the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Speak up and speak out. I don't know, but those were words I needed to hear this week. So it might have been for Eric too, but I'm going to take this one for myself. These were words I needed to hear this week, and as I thought about what I was going to share with y'all this morning, this week in the sermon series, as we continue, This Is My Story, we're talking about how characters have spine. Have you ever noticed that? It's why we have a category at the Oscars and other award shows for Best Actor and Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, is because we believe it's not only the filmmaking and the story that is really good, it is the characters and the portrayal of those characters that is really good. And I guarantee you that maybe some of your favorite stories, some of the best stories you have ever heard or seen or read, are stories where a character has spine, where a character has some grit, where a character becomes a hero or does something brave or courageous or vulnerable. That's often a trend in our stories. So I wonder today if we saw ourselves as a character, if we saw ourselves as the character in our story, what would it mean for us to be a person with a spine? A person with resilience, with grit, who seems to know what motivates them and what they're passionate about. So I want to read to you a story today about a character in the Bible that I believe has a lot of spine. And I'm going to read to you some of the pieces of his story, and then I want to talk to you about what I see happening in this story and maybe some pieces we can pull out for ourselves. This is the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a cupbearer, which we'll read here in just a minute, during the 5th century during an exile from Babylon. And what we find in Nehemiah's story is that he is given a task, and it's a big task, and it's a long task. And the choice to take on this task, the choice to then do this task, and then the choice to see it all the way through makes him a character that has a lot of spine. So what we read first about Nehemiah is that he starts in a place where he is struggling. We read in chapter 1, verse 11, it says, "O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give success to your servant today and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. At the time, I was a cupbearer to the king." So Nehemiah is written a little bit like a memoir. There are pieces that are written in first-person narrative as if Nehemiah is the one telling you his story. And so what he tells you up front is he is praying to God as he goes to talk to someone. And he's going to talk to the king. Now, he has a pretty close relationship with the king because he is the cupbearer. Now, this doesn't just mean he is a bartender. It doesn't just mean he goes and fetches water whenever the king gets thirsty. No, the cupbearer was a respected position. It was held with high honor. Because back in this day, the probability that somebody would try and poison the king was pretty high. And so the cupbearer was the one who respectfully and courageously always took the first drink to make sure that the king was not being poisoned. That's got to be a person with a lot of spine. I don't know that I would want to be that person. I would hope that maybe you could smell it before you actually had to taste it. Like, no, this one's bad, don't do this one. But to put your life on the line every single day for a king. Nehemiah was seen as noble, as respected. And this position of the cupbearer was one that was held with high honor. But he's struggling because he needs to go talk to the king about something. And so we read in chapter 2, starting in verse 3, it said, "I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my ancestors' graves, lies waste, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, what do you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. Then I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it." So what he's requesting of the king also points back to what he is praying to God about. He is seeing ruins around him, ruins of his ancestors. An image depicted of great suffering and pain. And what Nehemiah wants is not to stay in the comfort of his position in the palace. What he wants is to go and rebuild a city. And so instead of staying quiet, instead of staying comfortable, Nehemiah takes a bold step and he goes and asks a great leader and a king, would you allow me to go? Would you allow me to leave so that I can go and rebuild this city? So then we hear Nehemiah continuing talking. It says in verse 17, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace. I told them that the hand of my God had been gracious upon me, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. Then they said, let us start building. So they committed themselves to the common good." So Nehemiah not only asked the king, but he got the okay from the king. The king said go. But that was only his first obstacle. His second obstacle was that he had to convince a group of people to go with him because he was only one person and he couldn't rebuild a wall by himself. And so he goes and he pleads to his brothers and sisters, to his friends and his family, and says, we have to rebuild. Things cannot stay this way. We cannot stay in a place of disgrace or a place of suffering. We must rebuild. But as they begin rebuilding, this is the last part of the story I want to read to you today. We hear that they find some adversity. We hear that it's not all as easy as maybe they thought it was. In chapter 4, it says, Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, that stone wall they are building, any fox going up it would break it down. And Nehemiah says to God, hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn their taunt back on their own heads and give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt and do not let their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have hurled insults in the face of the builders. So we rebuilt the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. I think it's funny that Nehemiah tells this part of the story where people are hurling insults at them, telling them that they can't do it, and that he pleads to God and says, God, help us drown out the noise. And I love this line right here, that the people had a mind to work. What does it mean to have a mind to work? The people had a task that they stayed focused on. The people had a dream that they pursued. The people pursued and persisted, even when obstacles were in their way. Nehemiah is a character with spine, and I think that there are a few things that we can learn from him this morning. And the first is this: every character, every great hero, every character that we love and know that has spine starts their story out with some sort of suffering or struggle. There is very little that you will hear in a story, because where would the conflict and the tension be? What would be the point of a story if it did not start on some edge of things falling apart? And so for Nehemiah, the struggle was not his position or what he was doing. The struggle was what he saw happening to his people. His struggle, what was breaking his heart, was that he had to do something. But what we see with the character that has spine is that even though they have suffering, even though there is struggle in their life, they have a way to see past it. Not to see through it, but to see past it. When I was in junior high, 14, I was in track and field, and mainly just the track part, and I ran hurdles. It was not something I pursued later on because my growth spurt quickly just kind of stopped at 9th grade. But when I ran hurdles in 8th grade, there was something I was taught that was really important. When you are running the hurdles, and when you go to jump over that first hurdle and then the second hurdle, you do not look at the hurdle in front of you. Because if you look at the hurdle that is right in front of you, you will fall on your face, and believe me, I did. What you do when you are running hurdles, when you are jumping from one to another, is you have to look past them. You have to look forward. And what I love about the story of Nehemiah is that even in the midst of ruins and a city that has been destroyed, Nehemiah doesn't see destruction. Nehemiah sees an opportunity for rebuilding. Nehemiah is aware of the pain and suffering that is happening, but the gift that he has, the spine that is there, is that he knows how to see forward, to look past it, to recognize that our story is not just about what has happened or what is happening, but that our story, the story of hope that we believe in Jesus Christ, is that our story is about what will happen, what could happen. And what can happen in our own lives for us to have spine is for us to not only see what is right in front of us and continue to trip over ourselves over and over again, but instead to see past it, to look forward, and maybe see the vision and the future that God has. Because for some of us, it might not be about building a dream, it might be about rebuilding a dream. It might be about standing in the midst of our own mess and our own rubble and saying, but God has a better plan. God calls us to dream and to rebuild and to see something that is not just bigger, but something, friends, that is better. So the other thing that I notice about Nehemiah's story that I think is also true in many characters' stories, especially characters that have spine, is that Nehemiah seems to have a mentor. Nehemiah seems to not only be just the cupbearer to the king, he seems to feel comfortable enough with the king that he can be honest with him. And not only that, the mentor seems to be a good enough mentor that he lets him go. That he sacrifices having someone of great position who could stay with him, who could just be right by his side. And instead, he allows Nehemiah to go. He gives Nehemiah the authority that he needs. He encourages Nehemiah. We read about Ezra in chapters previous, another person that was a partner, a mentor. And what we see about characters that have spine is that they are never alone. They never can do things quite on their own. One of my favorite books and series is Harry Potter, and so you should give me a pat on the back every Sunday when I do not talk about Harry Potter, because it is typically all that I am thinking about next to Scripture. But one of my favorite lines in the book and in the movies is when Harry Potter wants to go off and figure it out on his own and do his own thing, and Hermione looks at him and says, "I've always admired your courage, Harry, but sometimes you can be really thick. You can't do this on your own." Characters that have spine are ones that recognize that you cannot go about the task, the courage, the significance, the importance on your own. We need partners, we need advocates, we need mentors. Right after the service today, I'd like to invite you to go and to meet a mentor of mine if you have not met her already. And I'd like for you to go and celebrate her for a minute. Gloria Scott has worked at this church as the director of worship and the director of communications and has been on our staff for 30 years. And she is retiring today. And so there is a reception for her right out these doors as you leave today. I encourage you to go and to say a word of thank you to her, because she is the woman behind the scenes. She is the woman on Sunday mornings as the director of worship who gets all of us, even when we're like herding cats, gets all of us in our place, helps us know what we're supposed to do. She helps us dream about what worship can do, and she helps us see and discern what God is calling us to speak about and share with you. And she is a mentor of mine because, among other things, Gloria has taught me the most about teamwork and the most about humility. Because even on the days when I think I leave the platform and have not said much of anything, Gloria is always one of the first ones there with the hug to tell me, "Great job," to affirm me, to be an advocate for me. Characters that have spine have people who are cheering them on, have people who walk alongside them, who partner with them, and continue to carry out the dream. As I speak about Gloria, I know that you have mentors that have come to your mind as well. But I want you to take a step further than that and maybe think about how you can be a mentor. how you can be that person in someone else's life? What are the words that you can say that could make a difference starting today? What are the things that you have to teach, to give, that desperately need to be given to someone that could make a huge difference in their life? Finally, today, I think a character with spine like Nehemiah is one that will rise to the occasion. One that will rise to the occasion. Have you ever heard that saying before? It's a saying that was said first in 1862 by Abraham Lincoln. In December, before the Emancipation Proclamation came about, before one of the bloodiest years in U.S. history, these are the words that Lincoln said. He said, "It is not, can any of us imagine better, but can we all do better? The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present." Does that sound familiar? The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so must we think anew and act anew. We must rise to the occasion. When I hear that quote, when I hear that and get that image, what I think about is the moments when I rise. When my spirit rises. Think about in a theater play when there is a standing ovation, when we rise for the national anthem. What I believe happens in those moments is that we do not stand simply out of obligation. We do not rise simply out of obligation. We rise when we are inspired. I believe the call of the church and the call for each and every one of us is to be people who have a spine and people who rise to the occasion. Because what better inspiration is there for us than this good news? This good news of Jesus, who is power, breath, and living water, such a marvelous mystery. How could we not be inspired? And during this time that sounds familiar as Lincoln talks about it, one that is divisive, one where we see the inadequacies of the past and the present, and we must rise to the occasion for a different future for our church and for our country. What better people than the people of God, the people of the church, to rise to the occasion? Because, friends, we are inspired by something much greater. We are inspired by a love that is beyond ourselves. We are called to rise to action. One of my favorite movies is The Greatest Showman that came out about a year and a half ago, I believe. Year ago? Last November, I think, maybe. And at the very end of the movie, P.T. Barnum is basically standing in the rubble of his life. He is standing at a time when his building has burned down, where the show had happened. His family is deteriorating, and he has lost his way. And in this moment, P.T. Barnum chooses to be a character that has spine. And there is this song that is sung called "From Now On," and I want you to hear the words. It says, "I saw the sun begin to dim. I felt that winter wind blow cold. A man learns who is there for him when the glitter fades and the walls won't hold. 'Cause from then, from the rubble one remains. From now on, these eyes will not be blinded by the lights. From now on, what's waited till tomorrow starts tonight. Let this promise in me start like an anthem in my heart. From now on, from now on. Let this promise in me start like an anthem in my heart." I'm going to invite the band to come back on stage, and they're going to sing a song about our identity. About our identity and the promise that we are given, the promise that we are God's children. And as children of God, we have a capacity for good, to be inspired, to rise to action. I believe God builds us each with the capacity to have a spine, to be people who are mentors and to have people who are mentors in our lives, to be people who rise to action, and to be people who see beyond the rubble and the pain and the suffering and look forward to God's great future. Let this promise in me start like an anthem in my heart. I want you to listen to these words this morning and hear where God is calling you, where God is motivating you to rise to action.